In case you're wondering why this video is starting off a whole lot different than before, it seems trying to be a more nuanced and reasonable guy in the room on the internet usually just results in a recipe for disaster, and that is exactly what happened to me yesterday. I originally put out a video trying to look at a new developer update from a calm perspective, and I completely fell for the corporate PR spin they were pushing. And seeing the company deal with their own multiple losses recently really played a huge factor into how I started giving them the benefit of the doubt. Because they were handing out these lawsuits left and right, even while Roblox was implementing changes that were taking their own player base, so I honestly thought they were just trying to legally protect themselves from the budding crisis when they announced this new developer fee. But I was wrong, and I ended up unlisting that video not even a day later, because the reality of what's happening right now is so much worse than a simple 1,000 Robux security deposit. And yes guys, that means no more Roblox's saved videos. Anyways, we'll go through a deep dive into how they intentionally hid the true mechanics of the new age gating system, and how they're secretly locking new creators out of reaching younger audiences, while being completely untransparent about the entire process. Now let's look at why I defended the update in the first place, and why that defense aged horribly the second the update went live. Because when they announced a 1,000 Robux publishing fee, they framed it as a fully refundable deposit that would stop bad actors from spamming inappropriate games on the platform. And that actually made a lot of sense from a safety perspective, because botters simply cannot afford to lose 1,000 Robux every time their game gets taken down by moderators. And that is something that goes along with what even Creecraft himself pointed out, which was the main reason I was like, yeah, that's reasonable. I'm willing to give them the good benefit of the doubt for that. But the problem is that they completely left out the specific details about what actually happens after you pay that fee, which is a huge issue because they're not being transparent about the requirements that actually make this update terrible. And it is really easy to side with the company when they say they want to stop bad actors, but it is a completely different story when you realize their solution is just to punish everyone else in the process. So right as the update launched, the panic set in very quickly because Creecraft posted a tweet showing that you needed 100 highly engaged players just to get your money back. And reasonably anyone would lose their minds over this, because getting 100 highly engaged players is basically impossible for a brand new independent developer who is just starting out. But here's what a lack of transparency really shows, because Creecraft even had to post a follow-up update stating that the company reached out to them to say that this was a mistake and that it had been corrected so that 1,000 Robux would be refunded. Because the actual fine print on their payment screen had a second clause that said you get your money back even if you fail to meet the publisher requirements within 90 days. So the refund itself was never really the issue, but the fact that the text was written so confusingly that even the biggest creators on the platform thought it was a permanent paywall just proves how terribly they communicate with their own community. But that is only the tip of the iceberg, because real nightmare is what that 100 highly engaged player metric is actually used for, and this is where the update becomes genuinely destructive. Because according to the actual developer forum post they put out, that metric has nothing to do with the money and everything to do with whether or not children are even allowed to see your game. Because they stated that if a game has fewer than 100 highly engaged players over the last 60 days, it can lose eligibility to be played by users under 16. And they try to justify this by claiming that games without an active community are more likely to have potential safety issues, so they want to make sure all games played by younger users are actively maintained. But this logic is completely flawed, because it assumes that small player bases automatically equal danger, which makes zero sense for niche roleplay games or small passion projects that only get a few dedicated players a day. Now this brings us to the most impossible hurdle that has ever been created for new developers, and it revolves around how you even get your game unlocked for all ages in the first place. Because another post pointed out that the platform is restricting all games to ages 16 plus by default from the start. And to reach younger players, your game needs at least 500 unique age-verified 16 plus players in the past 30 days. And if you do not hit the exact number, your game stays locked to older audiences forever. And the system they use to verify these players looks at the play history and account age and the platform expenditure to confirm they are real humans. But think about how ridiculous this actually is in practice, because if you're a new developer making a game targeted at 8-year-olds, you're now forced to somehow convince 500 verified teenagers with high platform expenditure to play your game meant for toddlers. And teenagers do not want to play with games meant for young kids, so you'll never organically get those 500 older players to sit in your game long enough to count as highly engaged. So you're essentially trapped in a cycle where your game cannot reach its target audience until it gets approved by an audience that has zero interest in playing it. And this is why my previous video was completely off the mark, because while I did still rightfully point out that it was a major concerning issue, I generally underestimated how horrible the algorithm they implemented for this actually was. I was looking at the financial cost without realizing that they were quietly building an invisible wall that separates creators from 75% of the platform, because close to half the entire player base is not even age checked, and half the people who are verified are not even 16 yet. So by forcing every single new game into a 16 plus trial period, they're essentially killing off any chance for organic growth for anyone who does not already have a large following to leverage. And this completely destroys a huge appeal that the platform had for the past decade, where any kid with a laptop could just make a game and instantly share it with millions of other kids around the world. And to make matters even worse, it seems like paying the 1,000 Robux fee does not even work the way it's supposed to, because the user posted his own experience, repaid the 1,000 Robux, and received all the green check marks saying he was eligible to publish all ages. But despite doing everything everything right and giving them his money, his game was still forcefully restricted to 16 plus anyway, and he was left completely confused because the user interface literally told him he had other requirements while simultaneously blocking his game from the public. So you're paying a deposit to unlock a feature the platform just outright refuses to give you, which further proves that the systems running this new update are fundamentally broken right out of the gate. And it's completely unfair to expect developers to hand over sensitive government information and their own money when a platform cannot even figure out how to accurately display a simple content maturity restriction status. And the community is rightfully fed up with this entire situation because the arguments defending these changes are falling apart left and right. Because another user made a really good point, completely dismantling the defenses that people were making for this update. Because when people said the fee can be refunded, they point out that almost no one has the resources to get 100 active players, and if they do, the fee does not even matter to them anyway. And when people claim that it will stop inappropriate games, they rightfully stated that the bad actors running those games have more than enough stolen funds to cover the fee without caring. And it's not just about the $10, because tying the ability to make games to a government ID verification requirement is just a large overreach for a platform aimed at children. But the most important point that was brought up is that the people who say 16 plus users are playing people are just factually incorrect, because older users are actually in a minority on this platform, and forcing new games into that restricted ecosystem severely hurts discoverability for honest creators trying to build an audience. And the sad reality is that they made this update slightly better by changing it to a refundable fee instead of a monthly subscription, but that does not justify the fact that the worst parts of the age gating were never changed or even properly communicated to the public. Now, trying to be nuanced about this update just aged poorly, especially for myself, because they're intentionally not being transparent about the specific details that make these systems so destructive. And they spew out a reasonable sounding compromise, like a security deposit acquired to outrage, while only revealing the impossible engagement measures once the update actually comes out. And it is frustrating to see a platform that was built entirely on the creativity of hobbyists and kids turn around and actively design systems that push those exact people out. And I take full responsibility for giving them the benefit of the doubt when I should have been looking closer at the actual mechanics they were putting into place. Because when you look past the PR statements and actually what is happening to developers trying to use the dashboard today, it is obvious this is not about safety anymore. It is about corporate standardization and building a walled garden that completely sacrifices the organic community that actually made the platform successful in the first place. And they do all of this without giving any clear definitions on what highly engaged even means, so developers are just failing invisible tests and losing their audiences with no explanation whatsoever. And expecting a community to thrive when the platform actively hides the rules of the game is not just negligent, but is a fundamental betrayal of the very people who build the platform from the ground up. Because pushing out these updates without properly warning small developers about their actual hurdles they will face just shows a complete disregard for the people who spend their free time building experiences that keep the platform alive. The fact remains that expecting blind loyalty from a community you actively receive is a recipe for disaster, and eventually the independent developers who built this platform will simply pack up their talent and find a storefront like Steam, for example, that actually respects their time and transparency. Because of how misleading this horror deal was, you'll probably notice that the style of this video is definitely a shift from our usual uploads, and moving forward, I might plan to carry this more grounded mindset into my future content to avoid falling for those Steam corporate traps, but also keep you guys updated on any changes being made to the platform, because obviously that's what I'm here to do. But yeah, I'm also going to be changing my approach to making videos in case you're unaware now. And I really want to know what you guys think about all these restrictions, and if any of you are dealing with this nonsense on the dashboard today. Because it's genuinely frustrating to see so many honest developers get completely sidelined by these updates. And I really appreciate everyone who watches these videos and actually cares about the long-term status of this community, if you're willing enough to stick around. So leave comments down below if you think this is something you'll be more used to. And I'll see you in the next one.